We are taking several weekends to go through verses of Romans 3, and we are comparing the Greek text with a modern English translation each week. And this week we're looking at Romans 3:20, and we're comparing it to the NLT, the New Living Translation. The New Living Translation is a great functional equivalent translation. It's people in common language, you might say it's more paraphrastic, it's more thought for thought. And I've given a copy to a neighbor of mine once who had no Christian background at all, so it's great for reading larger sections. But there is potential, always in any translation, for a loss of meaning, or the clarity or nuance of the original author's intent becomes somewhat obscured. So just understand this not as a criticism of modern translations, but as an appeal to you that, hey, put on the polarized sunglasses of reading the original text to prevent that distortion in your sight. Let's read the English translation here first from the New Living Translation of Romans 3:20. For no one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. The law simply shows us how sinful we are. And again, I think that's a good translation. I'd be happy for my neighbor to read that and come to understand that one of the main purposes of God's holy law, as written down, is to show us our sinfulness. It's a spiritual audit, right? It's not like we have to do a bunch of good things so that we can earn our salvation. I know that most of you know that, but let's just look at the obvious here. The law shows us our need for a righteousness outside of ourselves. Let's look at the Greek text here and see if there are any nuances that are potentially lost. Diati ex ergo namu ou dikagothesetai passas sarx enopian autou diagar namu epigenosis hamartias. I'm going to go with a real literal translation of the Greek, and then we'll compare in a little more detail. So, because, right, and here's your subject right here. I'm going to go real literal. It'll sound strange. Because all flesh, or every flesh, will, by the works of the law, will not be justified before him, right? Every flesh, all flesh, by the works of the law, will not be justified before him. So in English, it does sound better to say no one or no flesh will be justified before him. For through the law, and there's implied verb, is knowledge of sin. For through the law is a knowledge of sin, or is knowledge of sin. All right, what is different? Well, just a few things here, right? Notice this for in English. That's a little bit of a looser, more ambiguous connection. It can be tight, but diati is tighter than a gar. It's because of this, right? So I wonder if there's a little bit of a loss of the tightness of a connection. Sometimes we can begin an English sentence with for and not realize or not intend for it to show a tight connection with what went before. To be made right with God, that's, again, for a more functionally equivalent translation, is good. But is there potentially some loss in not translating this justify, the idea of forensic declarative justification, the doctrine of justification? Is there some potential loss of meaning? This could be reconciliation. This could be all kinds of stuff. But this is the verb dikaiao. Is there potentially a loss of meaning? Also, here, no one, noticing the original, it's pasasarx, it's flesh, right? And flesh can have a range of meaning. All words have a range of meaning, but one nuance is humanity in its frailty and in its fallenness, right? Now, obviously, it doesn't always mean that. When we read in John 1, the Word became flesh, it's saying Jesus was the second person of the triune God who had existed forever, but became fully human. It's not talking about him being sinful, but in reference to you and me, the word flesh often has the connotation of frailty and sinfulness. And is there not some potential loss here in just translating that no one? So every flesh, all flesh, will not be justified by the works of the law. And again, I think they nailed it here, doing what the law commands. It's talking about doing works that are commanded by the law, by God's holy law, that are in accord with his revealed moral standards. But some of you know that there's a lot of debate about works of the law, and this is obscured by translating it this way, or the interpretive decision is fully made. Whereas if you just say by the works of the law, it does leave open for potential other understandings, and people can understand why Jimmy Dunn, E.P. Sanders, and some of the debates and claims they have for this phrase. Right? Let's look for through the law implied is knowledge of sin, and you just have to ask, knowledge of sin, is that a little bit different than shows us how sinful we are? This seems to emphasize the extremity, to what extreme we are sinful, which is certainly true, but here it just seems to focus on the fact of our sinfulness. For through the law is knowledge that we come to know truly, experientially, convictionally, that we are sinners, that we come to know what sin is, because God has given us His holy law to reveal that. Again, that seems to be a little bit different than the NLT rendering here. I hope you're seeing that reading the text in the original language is valuable, and when you do that, you're reading the actual words of the apostles. You're putting on your polarized sunglasses to prevent distortion and misunderstanding.